Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and a busy week rolls on in the National Hockey League. The NHL Board of Governors meetings was yesterday. We have the NHL Awards later tonight. Should be a pretty slow night for the Pittsburgh Penguins with the NHL Awards this year. And then the NHL Draft coming up on Friday and Saturday with the opening of free agency leading us off next week on Monday afternoon. So with that today, that means we have a lot of different things to discuss. We're going to start things off by unveiling our top 10 free agents to watch for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll follow that up with the fact that the buyout window opens today. Will the Penguins partake in buyout season this year? And then we'll finish things off with our NHL draft preview, just kind of taking a holistic look at what the Penguins' approach should be at the Sphere in Las Vegas. But with that being said, let's get started. The Pittsburgh Penguins, they got a lot of work to do in free agency this summer. As of right now, they got a lot of players locked up. They got most of their roster, it seems, locked up. Now it's all about using that last around $11 million if you go by Cap Friendly or if you go by Puckpedia. They got about $11 million to perform some upgrades on their roster as of right now. So we have our top 10, and I'm going to say it right now, kind of lied a little bit, our top 11 free agents because there's a double header at number 10 here. But before we get into all of that, Horwat, do you think the Penguins are going to be very, very active?
It's tough to nail down. I don't know about too overly active. I think they're going to try and fill some holes. Maybe they'll take some big swings, but if they don't hit on a big swing, I think they're going to roll right along because their big focus, it feels like this summer's going to end up being trades. The Reilly Smith situation still seems all but certain he'll be moved. Now Tristan Jarry might be on the block after an Alex Nedeljkovic signing. So it seems like the Penguins' big offseason stuff is going to be more along the lines of wheeling and dealing rather than looking to find free agency. I wouldn't be shocked at some big swings. I definitely won't be shocked at some small depth signings. We know Kyle Dubas loves those, especially after his track record last year. So a couple of small names are almost certain. Maybe a big name. I doubt two big names, but maybe they'll be in on one name. We'll see what the whispers say over the next, the offseason is about 3 days long for a couple of teams, and the whispers of we'll see where it goes over the next 48 hours, essentially.
Yeah, you mentioned Tristan Jarry there, and if the Penguins do move on from Tristan Jarry, well, they're going to need to bring in another goaltender, and that's where we go with our number 10 on the top 10 free agent targets list. And this is a doubleheader here because, in my opinion, you can't go wrong if you're going on the free agent market with either Ilya Samsonov or Cam Talbot. Samsonov is more boom bust. Talbot is a little bit more of a sure thing, simply because when you look at Cam Talbot, 6 teams over the last 6 seasons, and the one thing that has been consistent has been his save percentage, averaging a .911 save percentage over the last 5 seasons. The only year where it was under .910 was an .898 save percentage 2 seasons ago in 2022-23 with the Ottawa Senators. But if the Penguins are looking for a goaltender on the open market, I like either of these guys because their contracts aren't going to be long. They're not going to be expensive, according to Daily Faceoff, which is where we got all of these contract projections from their top 75 free agents list. Samsonov at 1 year, $2.35 million. Talbot at 1 year, $1.8 million. I don't think you can go wrong with either of those guys if you're looking for a 1A, 1B going into next season with Alex Nedeljkovic.
And that's exactly it right there. It is if you're going for a 1A, 1B, because the Penguins goaltending situation is so fluid, but also kind of almost set. It's an interesting conundrum they have because you're right. They could bring in, if they end up dealing Jarry, bring in a backup / starter / veteran presence to sort of just be there and let Nedeljkovic take over full time. But also waiting in the wings is the top prospect in Joel Blomqvist that they might want to give a push to. So we created this list together sort of, but except I didn't have any goalies and whatever. I sent names over mostly because of the weird situation and that I wouldn't want to pay, if I was the Penguins, more than $1 million on a new goalie if they are bringing one in. Because let's say you can't move Jarry for some reason. I'm sure there are plenty of teams that are willing to take him. You're not going to add one, period. There's that's enough of that. But if you do end up moving Jari, I get Nedeljkovic's contract is pretty team friendly and affordable. You still don't want to use up that cap space that you have on someone that you're kind of just experimenting with.
Mm-hmm.
Of these names that you said, if the situation the Penguins are going for is 1A, 1B, yeah, absolutely. I think Samsonov is going to fit that mold a bit more than Cam Talbot. That's just my opinion. But even if you bring in Cam Talbot, it's a good option as a backup. That's a great option as a backup, especially a guy that's might be willing to, at this point of his career, take a step back and play third string for a little bit if Joel Blomqvist gets that push.
Yeah, so again, this is a contingency plan. That's why I wanted to make sure it was on the list because, again, what is the future of Tristan Jarry? Only a select few people in this world know at the moment. And unfortunately, neither of us are one of them. But let's move on in this list to number 9. And this is where I have Jake DeBrusk. As far as talent, he might be one of the top players on this list talent-wise, but there is sure to be a bidding war, a phrase that I could not find for the life of me yesterday on the live stream. But there is sure to be a bidding war for Jake DeBrusk, according to Cap Friendly's projections. 5-year contract, $5.8 million is around where they expect him to come in at. A lot of talent, an all-around game, likes to score down low, as I believe Josh Yohe of The Athletic put in his trade targets list with his free agent list with Jake DeBrusk. He's somebody that would probably fit in well with Sidney Crosby. So I have Jake DeBrusk at number 9. I just think that price tag is going to get a little bit too high for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
It might. Like I mentioned with the goalies, I don't want to go over a certain number. With DeBrusk, it's the same thing. You're not going to want to go over a certain number. He can bring a lot, that's certain. And he's always kind of floated around the Penguins in trade rumors or in rumors of this and that. It seems like a great option, but again, you got to keep it at a friendly price because Penguins don't have a ton of room to work with, especially if they can't pull certain trades off.
Mm-hmm.
So Kyle Dubas has to play smart with his salary cap, and who knows? Maybe like I said, in the next 48 hours before the first round of the draft starts, maybe things change and that space does open up, and you're able to get into a bit more of a bidding war for a guy like Jake DeBrusk. But it's free agency and everyone gets overpaid. You just don't want to be the GM that way overpays for somebody.
Yeah, a la Ryan Graves. It turned into a way overpay for Ryan Graves, more so because of the performance afterwards. But, that's a lot of money that you're paying a guy. And also, when you look at a guy like DeBrusk, and we'll get into this with number 8 as well, you still have Rickard Rakell for 4 more years after this year, or including this year. You still have Brian Rust for 4 more years, including this year. Are you really going to make another commitment to a top 6 forward where, yeah, DeBrusk has been good, but he is not that take it to the next level type of forward. He is not a Jake Gensel, which the Penguins are not going to be in on, in my opinion. He is not a Sam Reinhart. He is not a Steven Stamkos. I don't think the Penguins, if they can't afford to get in on DeBrusk, they sure as heck can't afford to get in on those guys, so don't expect them later on in this list. But, DeBrusk, I don't think takes it to another level enough to warrant a 5-year, $5+ million contract. And that's why I think I have him down as far as we do, down at number 9. And I think that's why Teuvo Teravainen, who's at number 8, is in a similar situation. According to Daily Faceoff, 4 years, $5.25 million. He's coming off of a career year as far as goal scoring with 25 last season with the Carolina Hurricanes, but he is a multi-time 60-point scorer. So it's not like last year was a fluke or a drop in the pan as far as his production overall. But definitely a career high in goals with 25, a multi-time 20 goal scorer. What do you think of Teuvo Teravainen and his fit with the Pittsburgh Penguins?
I like the idea of it. He strikes me as a guy that if he fits great, perfect, boom. But also, we had the Derek Brassard discussion last episode. For some reason, I don't know what it is, and I might be totally wrong, and would love to be proven wrong in this. Teuvo Teravainen is a great player. I don't know why. I have nothing based on this. This is just vibes I get when I hear the name. Just feel like he wouldn't fit in the Penguin system for whatever reason. Just the vibe of he's a great player. He does great things with other teams. For some reason, I feel he'd get here and it would just be a bit of a letdown. Now, maybe that's because, or like the Reilly Smith situation, maybe because the expectations would be so high that if he doesn't meet them, it looks like a failure, especially if you're free agent hunting for him, where, like I said, you overpay for guys. But at the end of the day, if the Penguins could nab him, that's a splash. And sometimes teams just need that splash signing, and he'd be one of them. So I don't totally hate the idea. You'd have to win the bidding war, no doubt. And I would just hope that my vibes are wrong. My vibes are usually off, so,
This is where we move over and get to a little bit more realistic as far as salary cap and years on the contract of free agent targets. And this is our first defenseman on this free agent list. At number 7, we have Oliver Shillington, projected to go for 1 year, $1.1 million. He missed the entire 2022-23 season due to being in the player assistance program, dealing with some mental health issues. And he came back out on the other side of it this past season, played 33 games to close out the year with the Calgary Flames. What do you think about Oliver Shillington as a potential option on the left side? Because the Penguins defense, as of right now, it seems fairly set. Obviously, there is still something to be determined with P.O. Joseph. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But what about Oliver Shillington as an option to come in and battle on that left side with Pettersson and Graves and potentially with a guy like P.O. Joseph?
It's an interesting option that I threw in there because he's young. We know the Penguins and Kyle Dubas are looking for, if they're looking to get younger, and whenever it comes to getting younger in free agency, the youngest you can get usually is 27. He is 27. He just turned 27 a little over a month ago. That's just an age option that fits. The fact that he's projected to get a 1-year deal also makes a good amount of sense for the Penguins, in maybe they can get him at a low number, kind of a prove-it year, and he's a guy that you can bring in on the left side, especially if you find a taker for Ryan Graves, or you need to organize that out, or maybe P.O. Joseph doesn't work out. Who knows what exactly is going on in those circles. But the left side is jammed. I understand that. But if certain moves happen, if certain dealing happens, a space opens up for a prove-it year for a guy like Oliver Shillington, who has proven to be a very, very effective player on the blue line before, mostly defensively.
Yeah, and the one thing I like about Shillington as well is he is a very smooth skater. He's somebody that you bring in, he's going to be able to keep up with a guy like Chris Letang in the defensive zone, because with the puck on his stick, Oliver Shillington has been pretty good in his career in the National Hockey League. So I think that you bring him in that aspect, I think he could fit with a guy like Chris Letang. And I also I agree with you. I like the 1-year deal. I understand that, especially when looking at defensemen, the ability to project out how these prospects and when they're going to be ready is very difficult. It's almost a fool's errand, but that gives you 1 more year to see where Owen Pickering is. And I think this is going to be a big year as far as telling how far away and finding out how far away Owen Pickering truly is to becoming a player at the NHL level, because this year he could go one of two ways. They could send him back to Swift Current at the WHL, or he could play against professionals for the first time. And either way, it's a big decision that's going to tell you a lot about where they view him. If he plays professionally, then we really get an opportunity to see where he's at whenever that level gets a little bit more intensified, whenever he's playing against grown men in the American Hockey League. So I think it's a big year for him, and buying out 1 year to be able to see where he's at without buying up further into the future and making more of a logjam on the left side, I think that'd be great. But I also think the Penguins definitely need, and if it comes at the expense of clogging up that left side a little bit more, I think you have to do it, because I do think the Penguins need another name on the left side that's able to play in that top 4. As of right now, the one guy that they've kind of earmarked for that is P.O. Joseph, but as we mentioned, he's a restricted free agent and he needs a contract as of this moment. So that's Oliver Shillington at number 7. Number 6, I got a name that I know you like. That's the name that got the biggest pop out of you in our pre-episode meeting. Victor Arvidsson, right wing, formerly of the Los Angeles Kings and the Nashville Predators. He's projected to go for 3-year contract, $4.75 million, a little expensive, coming off a year where he missed extensive time, first due to a back surgery, then to an unrelated lower body injury, but he had 15 points in 18 games last year for the LA Kings. What do you think of Victor Arvidsson as number 6 on this list?
I like the option. He's got the ability to play on that right wing, especially if the Penguins are able to.
You're good. That's one of Horwat's dogs back there going through it a little bit. He does not like the Victor Arvidsson idea, but I think he might be on the opposite end of where me and Horwat are.
Maybe a bit. Hopefully I can talk through this coughing a bit, but yeah, he fits. I feel like he's a name that would fit nicely on the right side of things, just because of those points were those were pretty good amount of points for a low amount of games played. You told me the win percentage with him in the lineup for the Kings was also really good.
Yes.
He's a gamer. He's a guy that can find ways to succeed. I feel like this is another one that would maybe the Penguins need to move out Rickard Rakell to make it work, or even file out Reilly Smith to open up that cap space because of the dollar amount. But regardless, I'd say it's a solid choice in terms of he's going to be someone that can easily fill into the lineup and, I mean, play anywhere. Top six, middle six. He's not going to be a fourth line guy, but if you need him on the third line, he can probably fill that out pretty nicely.
Yeah, and you mentioned the win percentage discrepancy with and without Victor Arvidsson last year for the LA Kings. With Arvidsson on the ice, the Kings had a .722 win percentage. And I get it was only in 18 games, but without him, .484. That is a significant drop-off. So obviously, I think that he's kind of a guy that's flown under the radar a little bit, probably because he hadn't played all that much last year in a contract year. But Arvidsson, it's a little bit of a gamble. $4.75 million for a guy that, had back surgery last year is a little bit of a gamble, but I think that his results speak for themselves. So he's certainly going to be a name that I keep my eye on. A name that a lot of people in Pittsburgh have been throwing out there, Dakota Joshua, left winger, Vancouver Canucks, coming off of a career year. He is projected by Daily Faceoff to have a 4-year, $3.25 million contract coming his way. What do you think about Dakota Joshua? Because I have some reservations about him being this high on this list.
I want to hear most of yours because I don't have too many opinions other than he seems like a feisty guy that could help the bottom six out for the most part. Mix it up in the the physical aspects of the game. Who I don't know what his brother's supposed to project. By the way, he's in the Penguins system right now. If maybe there's that sort of connection there. If Jagger Josh was projecting to be an NHL player, but who knows? I want to hear your opinions on it more, just because I don't have many. He played in the West. It was hard to really nail down, but it's just something I need to hear more of.
So he has had a pretty elevated shooting percentage throughout his entire career, typically over 11%. But last year, the year that he really got on everybody's radar, he shot 21.4%. Like, there is a massive regression to the mean coming, especially if he signs with the Penguins, because the Penguins historically, especially over the last couple seasons, are a team that has a very low shooting percentage. They don't typically finish with 21% or even above league average shooting percentages unless your name is Sidney Crosby, Jake Gensel, or Brian Russ. That's typically not been the case. Coming off of a year where he scored at a 21.4% clip on every shot he took, there's no way that persists. And paying him as such gives me a little bit of concern. Giving a guy that is going to be a bottom six guy 4 years gives me a little bit of concern, especially, going into a year where you're going to try to give your prospects as many opportunities as you can. I understand there's not a lot of them coming, and if they miss, they miss, and you don't have a lot to backfill that position. But at the same time, the reason he's this high on this list is because he fits the mold, as you'll see with two other names in the top 5. He fits the mold of the identity that I think both of us want to see the Penguins have next year in the bottom 6, and that's a little bit of grit, it's a little bit of grime, and that's a little bit more talent than they showed this past season. So that's where I stand on Dakota Joshua. I like everything else he brings. The one thing that worries me is overpaying him for his goal production whenever he shot 21% last year.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of where I fell on it too. It's just he's going to end up costing a lot of money for your bottom 6, and that's if I'm not willing to have the Penguins overpay for guys like Jake DeBrusk or Teravainen, what makes you think I'm going to want them to overpay for a Joshua? That just doesn't make sense for the team.
I like the player. I don't like the contract.
Yeah.
At least the projected contract, again, could come in much lower than that. Maybe the market takes a crazy turn whenever noon rolls around on Monday afternoon. But again, as a 3.25 over 4 years, I think that's a bit rich. And I think you're overpaying for somebody who exceeded expectations last season under Rick Tocchet and the Vancouver Canucks. Number 4, this is the last defenseman on this list. I have Matt Grzelcyk, somebody who had a rough end to a very solid stretch with the Boston Bruins. He's projected to make $3.25 million over 3 years in his next contract, but he cut his teeth in this league as a top defender next to Charlie McAvoy. So, in my opinion, that fits the mold of what you need. Again, you're buying out years that could potentially blockade other guys in the organization. You don't know what the future holds for Marcus Pettersson. You would hope they sign him to a multi-year extension coming up this summer or maybe next season. But you need another guy that can play top 4 minutes on the left side, and I think Matt Grzelcyk fits the bill.
He fits the bill a lot like Oliver Shillington. Pretty much the same stuff that we discussed about that earlier is that if you can move out one of the names on the left side because it's a bit jam-packed, he's a guy that fits right in. He's a little bit older. He's already 30, so maybe there's an age thing that might get in the way. Also, he's probably going to demand a decent amount of money. But for what he brings, it's almost always going to be worth the payment. It's just up to Kyle Dubas to get a good number. Again, none of this is certain, but quite an interesting name to keep an eye on, especially if the Penguins are looking for defensemen. If they're looking for left side defensemen, it's going to be a jam-packed situation. You know, at this point, we assume Ryan Shea's not going to return. We assume Jack Rathbone might not be coming back to the organization either. It's going to be fascinating to see how the rest of the left side works out and who's willing to go where in terms of on the depth chart. And Grzelcyk's a guy that goes near the top immediately.
The only problem that I have, again, and this is the problem with free agency, the money goes higher. And the only reason the money is this high for Matt Grzelcyk right now is because of the amount of left side options on the free agent market. There's not a lot. There is not a lot of guys, especially if you're looking for somebody to play alongside a Chris Letang or an Erik Karlsson. I'm assuming it's going to be Letang because I'm going to assume that Karlsson and Pettersson get the first crack again next season. There's not a lot of options. And a lot of them, there's certainly no guaranteed options, right? There's nobody that is going to be that top tier guy. And especially if you're looking for somebody that's a little bit younger, Shillington is younger, but Grzelcyk at 30, he's one of the younger options on the open market right now. But I do think that he is a fit for the Penguins. And I do think that if you're going to want to fill that hole, it's going to cost you. And that's unfortunate, but that's where you're at. And that's why maybe they choose to go the trade direction and try to fill that left side defensive slot. You know, in a hockey trade where if Tristan Jarry's on his way out or Reilly Smith, I think that might be a little bit more cost effective. But if you have to go to the free agent market, I think Matt Grzelcyk is your best option for that left side too on the defensive side of things. Number 3, top 3 are all forwards. Let's start with a left winger here. Tyler Bertuzzi, a name that I've mentioned a couple of times over the last month or so, expected to make $5.25 million over the next 4 years. What do you think of Tyler Bertuzzi here, Horwat?
Honestly, this is one where I'm just going to say it's all you taking this decision.
Yeah.
I don't totally hate it. It's just the way you're probably going to mention. It's all boom or bust with him. It is either to the moon or you're overpaying every penny for him.
Yes.
There's not going to be much in between. And just knowing the Penguins' history of things, I would say more than likely they're going to get the bust version of it. But convince me. I'm curious to hear the convincing. Again, I don't hate the player. I don't hate him as a player. I don't hate him as a person. I don't know him as a person, but you get what I'm saying. I don't hate the idea of Tyler Bertuzzi helping the Penguins out in some sort of way. I just want to feel out the fit a bit more than just here's a name that pops and go. Also, that price tag, that's just my thoughts on it.
Here's the thing with Tyler Bertuzzi. You mentioned it right there, and I said it before the show started. It's boom or bust, right? And it was bust at certain points last season as well. But then towards the end of the year, he finished with over 20 goals. It was sort of like the Brian Rust in 2022-23, where you say, well, somehow he finished with 20 goals. It wasn't a great season, but he finished with 20 goals. And when I look at a left side projected being Tyler Bertuzzi playing with Sidney Crosby, which makes me think that you're more likely to get the boom aspect than the bust. Tyler Bertuzzi, Michael Bunting, Drew O'Connor down that left side. That to me sounds like the beginnings of a playoff team. Obviously, you need to fill out the rest of the roster well, but Bertuzzi, Bunting, and O'Connor, not only do I like that as just the left side, I like the identity you're starting to bring to Pittsburgh. The we don't mess around identity. We're going to get into the net front and we're going to do our damage in the net front identity. And I think that's what they need more of. You saw how big it was to just bring in one guy like that in Michael Bunting last year. You bring in another guy like that in Tyler Bertuzzi, I think it just elevates what you could do as far as going out and being a net front team next year, which is what I think the Penguins need. And I think that'll help get their overall shooting percentage back up, because it's been low for a lot of years because, well, they don't get redirection goals. They don't get garbage goals a lot. Tyler Bertuzzi brings a little bit of that.
Yeah, you've talked me into it. I like that choice. It didn't
glad.
take much. Like I said,
I'm glad it was a little easier than I expected.
Yeah, I liked the player. I liked the name already. It just, not knowing the intangibles of it, that all makes sense. And you're right. Like, the Penguins do need more of that net front presence. They do need a bit more of that grit and grind that he brings. And I mean, sure, there were some low points last season, but if you look at some of the other numbers, I mean, in 16 games after 21 games after his trade to Boston last year, he had 16 points, 4 goals, which doesn't fit what I think the team is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But the 16 points sounds good, looks good. He's a helper. It can be a playmaker. And if he's playing alongside Sidney Crosby, who has unlocked some goal scoring ability a bit more recently, there's more fun to be had there. And, 62 points in 68 games the previous season on a very meh Detroit Red Wings team.
Yeah, it was essentially him, Mantha, and Larkin that year.
Yeah. Who, by the way, Mantha, another interesting name to watch, but we won't discuss.
Yeah, he didn't make the top 2. I'll just say that. Number 2, and this one to me, if he goes for the projected price, there's no reason the Penguins should not be in on this guy. That's Anthony Beauvillier, right winger. So you might have to move, a guy like Ricardo Kell over to the left. You might have to try to see if Valtteri Puustinen can move over to the left if he ends up making one of the roster spots. But projected to only make a 1-year contract at $900,000. When I saw that, I said, all right, well, he was already on the list. That shot him up to number 2, because I'm sitting here saying this is a 27-year-old that has played for 4 teams in the last 2 years, but he's had 5 15-goal seasons in his career. That is a perfect bottom 6 piece to add if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins and you're looking to try to bring some more offense to the team as a whole. You're trying to find it in different spots. Bring in a guy like Anthony Beauvillier, who has a proven track record in the Metropolitan Division to scoring more than 15 goals, and signing him for under $1 million would be a home run for Kyle Dubas.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize he'd played on that many teams. He's just been bouncing
3
around.
teams last year.
Wow. I just noticed that.
Yeah.
Fascinating. But how everyone will remember him as a New York Islander.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem to get injured too often. That's a lot of games played on a lot of those seasons. Played 60 last year despite playing on 3 teams.
Mm-hmm.
What do Penguins fans know about the Islanders? They play shutdown hockey. All 4 lines will attempt to shut you down one way or the other. Yeah, they're starting to grow a bit more of a goal-scoring touch, but they're known for their defensive mindset. And I've said it before, and I'll stick to it. The way Mike Sullivan likes to build his bottom 6 is the same way the Islanders like to build their entire lineup. And that just means he'd fit nicely in the bottom 6 here. Anthony Beauvillier would slide right in. He has a small scoring touch. If he scored 20 goals in the second year of his career. If he can find something like that, that's something to add to the Penguins' bottom 6, because it needs that goal scoring touch. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't, well, then he's bringing the other parts of the game that the Penguins are looking for, which is that defense, which is that bit more of a gritty concept, bit more of a grind, bit more of a sandpaper. Mm-hmm. He's going to record some points, not a ton. And at that price tag, cannot be beat.
Yeah. When you're bargain shopping, I feel like Anthony Beauvillier is going to be a top option for the bargain bin this year. And you mentioned it a little bit there, but you remember him from the New York Islanders. And what do you always remember? Oh, Anthony Beauvillier's in on a breakaway. Now, I understand, and we learned this last year. One player will not fix the Penguins as far as making them a team that's good off the rush. They're awful off the rush. In fact, last year was one of the worst. They were one of the worst teams I've ever seen on the rush, just in general. But Beauvillier does give you a little bit of that home run aspect of, oh, he can get in on the breakaway because he's got the wheels to do so. And if he can finish, man, he could be a very dangerous addition to the bottom 6. The number 1 guy on this list, and again, this is probably me doing a lot of heavy lifting because this is a guy that I have mentioned time and time and time again. And if you are active listener of Tip of the Ice-Burgh, somebody that listens in every week, you know who I'm going to say already, and that's Max Domi. center/right wing, projected to make $3.6 million over the next 2 years. I see no downside, personally, to bringing in Max Domi to set the standard for the Penguins' bottom six, to start that identity of the Penguins' bottom six. And if all things work out and one of Jaeger, which, again, very unlikely, but Jaeger, maybe a Poulin, maybe a Ponomarev, if one of them are ready to be that third-line center, you can bounce him to wing, and he can go up and down the lineup. It seems like a Mike Sullivan type of guy. I just think for that price, 2 years at $3.6 million, bring in Domi, slot him in at third-line center to start the year, and go Crosby, Malkin, Domi, Eller, and you're working with some really solid depth down the middle.
Yeah, that's called cooking with gas. That is absolutely turning up the heat, especially on your center depth. I didn't realize his projections coming in that low. I feel like he's definitely going to go for more than that, but especially if you have to try and pry him out of Toronto. I forget what the most recent situation was there. But if he's hitting the market, if he's going to go to free agency, I'd say he's a guy that the Penguins absolutely should be targeting, especially if the projection's that low, especially if the years are that short. I mean, the Penguins aren't necessarily a team looking for, despite the Ryan Graves signing last year, they're not a team that's really looking for long-term scenarios. They shouldn't be looking for long-term relationships here. It should just be guys that are 2-3 years max, maybe a fourth, depending on the player, because they have to honestly just figure out what's going on with Sidney Crosby. How much longer does he want to play, or can he play? I mean, we know Malkin's probably gone in 2 years. The Chris Letang situation's going to get interesting. Hate to say that, but it's going to. Carlson's around a little bit, but older, so who really knows? And the Penguins are just in such a weird situation that they can't commit long-term to guys. Max Domi, if he's only going for 2 years, perfect. Come in, play a couple years, maybe stays for a third if he wants. And by that point, the Penguins should be ready to completely overturn everything. And at a low price, he'll bring quite a bit of punch to the lineup. It's a good win-win situation as long as he's affordable and plays anywhere near what he's projected to.
The one name you mentioned there was Evgeny Malkin. 2 years left on his contract. Heavily expected and speculated upon that he is going to be done after those 2 years. There's your window. You have 2 years to win a Stanley Cup with Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby. I like Max Domi as your third-line center. And if you want to bring in another third-line center, I don't mind Max Domi bumping over to wing for $3.6 million either. So you have him. You have Michael Bunting, I believe, for the same amount of time. Start to line things up here, and makes a lot of sense. So that is our final list. We're going to actually move over and talk about some other things really quickly. But number 10, split between Ilya Samsonov and Cam Talbot. Number 9, Jake DeBrusk. Number 8, Teuvo Teravainen. Number 7, defenseman Oliver Shillington. Number 6, Victor Arvidsson. Number 5, Dakota Joshua. 4, Matt Grzelcyk. 3, Tyler Bertuzzi. 2, Anthony Beauvillier. And the number 1 free agent to watch for the Pittsburgh Penguins is Max Domi. So we hope you enjoy that. Let us know some of the free agents we might have missed, some of the guys that you think should be on the Pittsburgh Penguins radar going into Monday afternoon. But let's move over and talk a little bit about, well, buyout season, because it is here as of right now. The Pittsburgh Penguins typically not big in buyouts. They're still paying, obviously, Jack Johnson for the next 2 years, this year and next year. They have one more year left on Jeff Petry's retained salary from the Erik Karlsson trade last year. But the first buyout window opens today for this offseason. It closes on Sunday prior to the opening of free agency on Monday. Last season, Dubas mentioned right off the jump, he does not like to buy players out because he does not like to pay players to not play for the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. He waited a lot on Mikael Granlund. He waited through the first buyout period. He waited until almost needing to do it in the second buyout period because there will be a second, or there was a second one last year because Drew O'Connor took him to arbitration. He ended up being able to move off of Mikael Granlund, the Erik Karlsson trade. This year, maybe a similar situation. You look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, there's not a lot of buyout candidates to begin with. The only name that I can think of is Reilly Smith. Now, we've talked ad nauseum over the last couple of weeks about, well, Reilly Smith's going to get traded. Reilly Smith's going to get traded. But it hasn't happened as of yet. It didn't happen before the trade deadline because there was nobody willing to take on that contract. The question then becomes, Horwat, the buyout calculator says this year, Reilly Smith would count $2.3 million against salary cap. Next year, $1.3 million, and then he would be done. Would you rather, if it comes down to it, buy out Reilly Smith and have those cap hits, or just let him play through his contract, at least to the start of the season, and see if he can bounce back on the Penguins roster?
I'm very much in the same boat as Kyle Dubas, and I'd much rather pay the guy to play for the team and not buy him out to pay someone who's not there. I get Reilly Smith had a pretty poor season. If you do a buyout, you want it to be a decent number. 2.3 seems just a little steep in my eyes, especially if it ends up being multiple years of 2.3 and then 1. It's the most reasonable one. It's kind of low, but you don't have a ton of space. And I get that clears up a bit, but just seems like, to me at least, you'd much rather pay the guy to maybe turn it around. You never know. He is a quality player. He has the attention of a ton of teams in the league, I guess, to be acquired. So if he has that sort of attention, if he has that sort of capability, maybe if they can't find a trade partner, maybe you bank on him bouncing back. If not, maybe you have to come around to it. But it's, to me at least, it would just be not the wisest move to suck up cap space that you're not going to use, especially if you already have, buyout, Jack Johnson's buyout for another 2 years, and you're still retaining on Jeff Petrie for this year as well. Don't forget that one. So all of a sudden, let's round up and say $1 million on Jack Johnson for 2 years, 1.5 on Petrie for this upcoming season, and then 2.3 for Reilly Smith. That's a lot of money tied up into players you're not using, players you are actively paying to not play on your team.
Yeah,
that's just the way I see it. Had Petrie not been retained, or had Jack Johnson not been bought out in this situation, maybe I look at it and go, it's only 2.3 for a year. You'll lose it in next, whatever. But the fact that that's also already there just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, when I look at this situation, Reilly Smith, he had a down year. And if you're doing what you're saying here and you're hoping that he bounces back, add him to the list. There's already a lot of players the Penguins are counting on to bounce back this season. Rickard Rakell, well, they're hoping he comes back and has a better season. Ryan Graves, they're hoping he comes back in a lesser role, potentially on a third pairing, and he has a better season. Erik Karlsson had a pretty good year, but they're hoping that he bounces back to have a more productive year, more so in line with what he did his last year in San Jose. Again, don't expect 100 points, people. I need a sign so I can point to it. Don't make me point at the sign. He is 100 points by a defenseman is not a typical thing. Don't expect that of somebody going into a season. But the point is, they're trying to hope for all of these players to bounce back. Adding Reilly Smith to that list doesn't sit well with me. Now, again, obviously, the market for him is not phenomenal. Otherwise, he would have already been moved. But if they get the opportunity, meaning if P.O. Joseph heads to arbitration and brings back what you had last year with Drew O'Connor, and he gives you the entire summer to find a trade, if that happens and you still can't find a trade after free agency is done, after the dust is settled on most of the NHL offseason, then I think you seriously consider buying him out, because $2.7 million in free space is much better than $5 million on a player that might not bounce back and might be an anchor on your team.
And that's totally fair too. I get it. The longer I've looked at it, I can understand it. Again, I just look at the additions of Petrie and Johnson. Just wrong time for the Penguins to buy someone out now, because essentially that adds up to about $4 million if you take the actual money. And what did we just go over? What did we just talk about? 10 free agent possibilities that, man, you could use that extra $4 million. I mean, I get it's locked up in 5. Maybe it clears out space, but let's say there weren't other names already being paid to not play in Pittsburgh. Well, then it's looking a little different. Then you have that extra money to really go into that bidding war with Jake DeBrusk, to really go in that bidding war for Teravainen or Max Domi or Tyler Bertuzzi, whoever. It's a tough one. This is why I don't ever want to be a general manager. This is why you have to envy those guys, those front office employees that are doing this math, that are taking in the pros and the cons of all of this, and are thinking about it a lot longer than I have, which is at 9:05 a.m. on a Thursday. So it's a tough one to lock down fully. I just think I usually ride in the same boat in Dubas when it comes to buyouts.
Yeah, that's fair. And I understand that this is all coming from a place where Kyle Dubas does not like to do it. So the odds are stacked against me being the guy that wants to do it. But even that $2.7 million, you know what that pays for? If you want to bring it back to our top 10 free agents, pays for Anthony Beauvillier and half of Max Domi without even touching that $11 million that's open. So again, there are pros and cons to it. But I just think that if it comes down to whether or not you're going to let Reilly Smith try to play this out and bounce back in year two, or you're going to cut bait and try to open up some space, I cut bait and open up some space. It's what I think would end up being best for the Penguins, because I think that they need a change there, especially, you can't go into next season with Reilly Smith and the same top six, with the only major change being Michael Bunting coming in from last season. I just don't see it. But at the end of the day, I don't think it happens this weekend. I think if it happens, it's going to be because P.O. Joseph goes to arbitration and they have all that time to figure out whether or not they can actually make a trade. It's already been a long time that they haven't been able to make a trade, but maybe once the dust settles on free agency, some people are a little bit more inclined to take on the veteran forward. Let's finish things off today by previewing the NHL draft, because that comes up this week. And similar to the buyout, not going to be too busy for the Pittsburgh Penguins. The NHL draft begins tomorrow night at the Sphere in Las Vegas. First round kicks off at 7:00 Eastern time. The Penguins officially have 6 selections in the 2024 NHL draft: 2 second-round picks, 44th and 46th overall, a 4th-round pick at 111th overall, a 6th-round pick at 175th overall, and 2 7th-rounders at 207th overall and 223rd overall, the pick that came over for Chad Ruhwedel. The question that I'm going to ask you, Horwat, because obviously the Penguins don't have any first-round selections, so a lot of these names are off the board for the Penguins. Do they need to go defense heavy looking at their prospect system now? Do they need to go defense heavy throughout this draft?
Yes, they do. When you look at their system of prospects, we had the discussion with Jacob Puntori not too long ago. It's a lot of forwards we're talking about. It's a couple of goalies, too. There's not a ton of defensive depth there. There's Owen Pickering, for sure. There's Emil Pianiniemi, but we haven't seen too much of him, and he still needs to make it over to North American ice on a regular basis. Jack St. Ivany kind of stuck out from the crowd as not listed as a top prospect, but then all of a sudden made noise in the NHL. You're going to need guys like that in the system, but they don't even have that. We had the discussion not too long ago. Then when it comes to right-handed defensemen, had it not been for Jack St. Ivany, we'd have been looking at another Taylor Fedun tenure in Pittsburgh. That's just how thin the right side is, at least. Because even the way I mentioned Pickering and Pianiniemi, left sides. They're left side defensemen. So when it comes to picking prospects this time around, the Penguins do need to heavily focus on defense, and really just as many as they can. Without looking even deeper into the depths of who the Penguins have on tap in the pool, it's not many defensemen. Just off the top of my head, it's a ton of forwards, and like I said, those couple of goalies. The defensive backing of this team is thin. It's Owen Pickering and a couple other guys, but they're not sticking out. So they're going to need to add defensemen to really build the blue line for the future.
Yeah, especially with that 44th or 46th overall pick, I'm looking at a right shot defenseman. You have to. You just don't. The cupboard is so bare that you need defensemen, and you need high-end defensemen with those second-round picks. But honestly, after that, considering what the Penguins have, and I understand that it is in a probably 200% better position right now than it was a year ago, you just need to fill the cupboard any way possible. So go best player available after that. I think the second round, 44 and 46, if they do stick there, use those on defensemen, and then the remaining 4 picks, go out there and just take best player available. And I think that's probably what they do, especially once you get into the 6th and the 7th round. You're picking, a lot of projects, you're going to pick the one that you think has the highest upside no matter what position they play. But I think early in this draft, I agree with you. They need to focus in on getting some defensemen in this prospect system because, Dubas is added, but Cruz Lucius is a forward. Vasily Ponomarev is a forward. Ville Koivunen is a forward. Braden Yeager, who he drafted with the first overall pick or first round pick last year, is a forward. So you need to start adding some defensemen. And I think this weekend, it's about high time they start doing that. So it's going to be interesting. We'll obviously keep an eye on that. And I think we're going to try to bring somebody on next week to break down the picks that they have. Obviously, with that intermixed with free agency, it's going to be a busy couple of weeks for us here at the tip of the iceberg. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, because that is going to do it for this one. Remember, you can find us anywhere you get your podcast from or on YouTube by simply searching Tip of the Iceberg. Enjoy a very busy weekend across the National Hockey League. We'll see you guys next time.